The biggest mistakes in life are rarely made with bad intentions. They are made with quick assumptions. At exactly 7:42 on a cool Tuesday morning, the city was already moving at full speed. Commuters hurried toward office buildings with steaming coffee cups in hand. School buses rolled through quiet neighborhoods. Delivery trucks filled the streets with the familiar sounds of another ordinary workday. At a modest bus stop on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and Pine Street, a woman stood alone beneath a faded blue shelter, calmly reading through a thick stack of legal documents. She wore a simple navy blazer, comfortable black slacks, and practical walking shoes. Her leather briefcase showed years of careful use, and the silver watch on her wrist looked more sentimental than expensive. Nothing about Danielle Brooks demanded attention. She looked like any other professional trying to get to work before the morning rush swallowed the city whole. Every few moments, she glanced at the approaching traffic, then back at the neatly organized papers in her hands. Hidden among those pages were documents that could change the future of an entire police department before sunset. Danielle never believed authority needed to announce itself. She had spent nearly 2 decades serving the law, learning that real power usually arrived quietly. As an assistant United States attorney, she had stood inside federal courtrooms, questioned powerful witnesses, and helped dismantle organized corruption one piece of evidence at a time. Yet on this particular morning, none of those accomplishments mattered to the strangers passing by. To them, she was simply another black woman waiting for the Route 16 bus. A few hundred feet away, Officer Ryan Walker guided his patrol cruiser through the neighborhood with practiced confidence. 12 years wearing the badge had taught him to trust his instincts above almost everything else. His supervisors praised his productivity. His fellow officers admired his decisiveness. But somewhere over the years, decisiveness had quietly become certainty, and certainty had slowly transformed into judgment. Ryan noticed Danielle from half a block away. A woman, standing alone, a warm briefcase, looking repeatedly down the street, reading documents while checking her surroundings. In his mind, the story wrote itself before he even slowed the patrol car. He pulled toward the curb, his tires crunching softly against loose gravel as curious pedestrians instinctively looked over. Danielle calmly closed her folder and raised her eyes toward the approaching cruiser. Her expression remained composed, almost patient, as though she had seen moments like this before. Ryan stepped out with measured confidence, adjusting the radio on his shoulder while studying her from head to toe. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence itself seemed to stretch across the busy sidewalk as passing buses, bicycles, and morning commuters continued without realizing they were witnessing the first seconds of a decision that would soon dominate headlines across the country. Danielle offered a polite smile that never reached anxiety. Ryan answered with suspicion that never reached understanding. In less than 3 hours, attorneys, federal investigators, city officials, and television cameras would all be talking about this exact bus stop. The question would no longer be why a woman had been waiting for a bus. The question would become why one assumption had just cost an American city $4.7 million. Danielle Brooks had always believed that dignity was something a person carried long before anyone recognized it. That belief had guided every step of her career, from the first day she walked into law school carrying borrowed textbooks to the countless mornings she entered federal courthouses where people often underestimated her before she spoke a single word. She never argued with first impressions because experience had taught her that truth always took longer to arrive than assumptions. That morning it started before sunrise inside her quiet townhouse on the east side of the city. A kettle whistled softly while local news played in the background, mentioning traffic delays and another unusually cool spring morning. Danielle reviewed several pages from a confidential case file while finishing a simple breakfast. At precisely 8:30 that morning, she was expected to join a meeting with senior federal prosecutors preparing for a major grand jury presentation. The investigation had taken nearly 18 months. Thousands of pages of financial records, witness interviews, electronic communications, and internal reports have been carefully assembled into a case that could reshape public confidence in the justice system. Every document inside her worn leather briefcase had been organized the night before with the kind of precision that only years of courtroom discipline could produce. She usually drove to work, but her sedan had been left at a repair shop after routine maintenance revealed an unexpected engine problem. Rather than requesting a government vehicle or asking a colleague for transportation, Danielle simply checked the city transit schedule and planned her morning around the next available bus. She appreciated ordinary routines. They reminded her that public service was exactly that, service. Across town, Officer Ryan Walker was finishing his second cup of coffee inside the patrol vehicle while listening to dispatch updates through the radio. Several reports had already come across his screen that morning, ranging from minor traffic complaints to suspicious activity calls that turned out to be misunderstandings. None required significant action, yet each one quietly reinforced his growing confidence that he could identify trouble before anyone else noticed it. His training had taught him to remain alert, but over time his confidence had become something far more dangerous. He had stopped asking whether his first impression could be wrong. As Ryan drove through the neighborhood surrounding Jefferson Avenue, his attention drifted toward the bus shelter almost automatically. The woman standing there appeared completely calm, yet his mind immediately began filling empty spaces with conclusions instead of questions. He noticed the briefcase before he noticed the neatly pressed legal documents. He noticed her repeated glances down the street before realizing she was simply checking whether the bus had arrived. He saw someone who looked out of place instead of someone patiently following a morning schedule. Danielle watched the patrol vehicle approach without changing her posture. She carefully slid the papers back into their folder, secured the clasp on her briefcase, and waited respectfully beside the bench. Several nearby commuters exchanged curious glances before quietly stepping farther away, sensing that something unusual might be unfolding. A young father gently guided his daughter closer to the bus schedule posted on the shelter while pretending not to watch. An elderly couple stopped their conversation. Even the usual sounds of the morning seemed strangely distant for a brief moment. Danielle remained composed, taking one slow breath before the patrol car came to a complete stop. She had spent her career standing inside courtrooms where emotions often determined the outcome long before evidence ever appeared. She understood that panic solved nothing. Calmness, however, had a way of revealing character. What neither Ryan nor the growing number of silent observers understood was that the next few minutes would become far more important than anyone standing on that sidewalk could possibly imagine. Officer Ryan Walker stepped out of the patrol cruiser with the steady confidence of someone who believed experience rarely failed him. The morning breeze carried the distant sound of another city bus approaching somewhere several blocks away, but the stop on Jefferson Avenue remained quiet except for the handful of commuters pretending not to pay attention. Ryan adjusted the small camera attached to his uniform and approached Danielle Brooks with measured steps. She greeted him with the same calm courtesy she offered everyone she met. "Good morning, officer," she said warmly. "Is there something I can help you with?" Ryan did not return the smile. His eyes shifted from her face to the weathered leather briefcase resting beside her polished shoes. "May I ask what you're doing here this morning?" he said in a firm voice. Danielle answered without hesitation. "I'm waiting for the downtown bus. I have a meeting in less than an hour." Her answer was simple, direct, and completely truthful. Yet Ryan's expression remained unchanged. "Would you mind showing me some identification?" Danielle nodded politely. "Of course." She carefully reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and removed a wallet containing several identification cards. Before handing them over, she paused for just a moment. "Officer, some of these documents are related to confidential government business. I would appreciate it if they remain protected." Ryan accepted the identification without acknowledging her request. His attention lingered only briefly on the federal credentials before returning to her briefcase. Something about the ordinary appearance of the woman standing in front of him refused to match the conclusion he had already reached inside his own mind. He studied the official identification again, but instead of allowing it to answer his questions, he searched for reasons to doubt it. Danielle noticed the hesitation immediately. She had seen that expression before in conference rooms, courtrooms, and government offices across the country. It was the look of someone struggling to reconcile appearance with expectation. She remained perfectly still, folding her hands in front of her, while Ryan continued examining the cards. Around them, the quiet audience slowly grew larger. Office workers arriving on foot slowed their pace. A city maintenance truck paused briefly at a nearby traffic light. Two college students waiting farther down the sidewalk exchanged uncertain glances before lowering their voices. Nobody interrupted. Nobody understood exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed that the ordinary rhythm of the morning had quietly shifted. Ryan finally looked back at Danielle. "You said you have a meeting?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "It is an important federal meeting, and I would prefer not to arrive late." Ryan glanced once more toward the briefcase. "Would you mind opening that for me?" Danielle answered with the same composed tone she had maintained from the beginning. "Officer, I am carrying protected legal files. I cannot voluntarily expose confidential materials in a public place without proper authorization." Her words were respectful, but they also reflected years of professional responsibility. Ryan interpreted them differently. In his experience, hesitation often meant concealment. Instead of hearing a federal attorney carefully protecting privileged documents, he believed he was listening to someone avoiding cooperation. Danielle noticed the subtle change in his posture before he spoke again. His shoulders became more rigid. His questions became shorter. The conversation slowly stopped feeling like a routine encounter and began feeling like an examination built upon conclusions rather than facts. She quietly looked toward the street where the city bus should have appeared by now. Instead, another government sedan drove past without stopping. Somewhere across downtown, a conference room was already filling with prosecutors, investigators, and federal officials waiting for one person who had never once arrived late during her entire career. Danielle returned her attention to Ryan and spoke with remarkable patience. "Officer, I understand that you're doing your job. I only ask that you take one more careful look at the identification you are already holding. It tells you exactly who I am." For a brief second, the morning became completely still. Ryan looked down once again at the credential in his hand. Then, instead of questioning his own assumption, he questioned hers. That single decision quietly moved everyone standing at the bus stop one step closer to a moment none of them would ever forget. Ryan slowly lowered the identification card, but instead of accepting what was printed in front of him, he looked back at Danielle with growing skepticism. "Anyone can carry a card," he said evenly. "Credentials can be copied." Danielle did not react with frustration. She simply nodded once, as though she had heard the same sentence before. "That is why the issuing office verifies them," she replied calmly. "You are welcome to contact the United States Attorney's Office. They will confirm my identity immediately." Ryan glanced at the radio on his shoulder, but never reached for it. Instead, he shifted his attention toward the leather briefcase resting beside the bench. "If everything is legitimate," he continued, "then opening your briefcase should not be a problem." Danielle maintained steady eye contact. "Officer, those files are protected under federal law. They contain material related to an active legal matter. I cannot expose them in a public place without authorization." Her answer was respectful, measured, and completely consistent with the responsibilities of a federal prosecutor. Yet Ryan interpreted every calm explanation as another reason to become more convinced that something was being hidden. Across the sidewalk, the small audience continued to grow. A city bus approached the stop, slowed for several seconds, then pulled away after the driver noticed the patrol vehicle blocking part of the curb. Several passengers looked through the windows with puzzled expressions before disappearing down the avenue. Danielle watched the bus leave without saying a word. Missing it meant she would almost certainly arrive late unless another route appeared quickly. Even then, she remained composed. She understood that arguing rarely changed a mind already made up. Ryan took another slow step forward. "Please place the briefcase on the bench," he instructed. Danielle carefully lifted it with both hands and set it down exactly where he requested. She made no sudden movements. Her voice remained steady. "Officer, I want this interaction to remain professional. Everything I have told you can be verified in a matter of minutes." A young woman standing nearby quietly pulled out her phone, uncertain whether to record what she was witnessing or simply call someone. An elderly man folded his newspaper and watched silently from the opposite end of the shelter. The morning traffic continued flowing around them as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet everyone standing within a few yards could feel the growing tension created not by raised voices, but by the widening distance between facts and assumptions. Ryan asked Danielle several more questions about where she worked, where she was traveling, and why she had chosen public transportation that morning. She answered each one patiently. She explained that her personal vehicle was being serviced. She explained that she had an important meeting downtown. She explained that public transit was simply the most practical option. Every answer was clear. Every answer was truthful. Somehow, none of them changed the direction of the conversation. Ryan looked once more at the federal credential before handing it back. "I'm not satisfied yet," he said. Danielle accepted the card carefully and returned it to her wallet. "Then please verify it through the proper channels," she answered. "The information is available to you." For the first time, a hint of disappointment crossed her face, not because she feared the outcome, but because she recognized what was happening. This encounter had quietly stopped being about evidence. It had become about perception. She glanced briefly toward her watch. The meeting downtown would begin soon. Inside a federal conference room, empty chairs waited beside neatly arranged case files while colleagues checked the clock, assuming unexpected traffic was the only explanation. Danielle drew one slow breath before looking back at Ryan. "Officer," she said softly, "there are moments when taking an extra minute to confirm the truth can prevent a lifetime of regret." Ryan heard the words, but he did not absorb their meaning. Believing he was protecting the public, he chose to continue down the path he had already decided was correct, unaware that every passing second was creating a record that dozens of people would soon examine with extraordinary attention. Danielle stood quietly beside the bench while the morning sun slowly climbed above the buildings across Jefferson Avenue. She could feel time slipping away, not because she feared what was happening at the bus stop, but because somewhere downtown an entire legal team was beginning to wonder why she had not arrived. Inside the leather briefcase, resting only a few feet away, were carefully organized folders marked with color-coded tabs. To anyone else, they looked ordinary. To the people waiting inside the federal courthouse, they represented months of preparation, thousands of hours of investigation, and the testimony of witnesses who had trusted the justice system enough to tell the truth. Ryan looked toward the briefcase once again. He noticed several official envelopes tucked neatly beneath the handle, each bearing government letterhead. He also noticed a sealed folder with a bold notice indicating that the contents were restricted. Instead of recognizing those details as confirmation of Danielle's explanation, he viewed them as reasons to continue asking questions. At that exact moment, a soft vibration came from inside the briefcase. Danielle immediately recognized the sound. It was her government-issued phone. A second vibration followed only moments later. Then another. Ryan glanced toward the briefcase, but made no effort to determine who was calling. Danielle spoke carefully. "Those calls are probably related to the meeting I mentioned. If you allow me to answer, everything can be clarified very quickly." Ryan shook his head. "We are not finished here." Danielle simply nodded. The phone stopped vibrating, only to begin again less than 30 seconds later. Nearby, the young woman who had quietly observed the conversation checked the time on her own phone and whispered to the elderly man standing beside her. Both of them looked toward Danielle with growing concern. Nothing about her behavior suggested panic, anger, or dishonesty. She remained composed, answering every question directly while making no attempt to leave. A delivery driver walking toward a nearby office slowed long enough to notice the repeated calls echoing faintly from the briefcase before continuing down the sidewalk. Unknown to everyone at the bus stop, inside the United States Attorney's office, Danielle's empty chair had not gone unnoticed. A senior prosecutor looked around the conference table before checking the clock for the third time. Another attorney attempted to call Danielle's government phone, expecting a quick apology about traffic. Instead, the call rang unanswered. Across the hall, a legal assistant opened Danielle's electronic calendar and immediately realized something was wrong. Danielle had never missed an important meeting without notice. Never. The concern spread quietly through the office. A court liaison attempted another call. An administrative coordinator sent a secure message. Still nothing. Back at the bus stop, the phone inside the briefcase vibrated once more, followed by the distinct notification tone of an incoming secure message. Danielle looked calmly toward Ryan. "Officer, every unanswered call increases the chance that important people will begin looking for me." Ryan remained convinced he was controlling the situation. "If everything is legitimate," he replied, "they can wait." Danielle lowered her eyes for only a moment before answering with remarkable restraint. "Justice rarely waits for anyone." Neither of them realized how true those words would soon become. Less than 3 miles away, the absence of one federal prosecutor had already interrupted carefully coordinated schedules involving prosecutors, investigators, court personnel, and federal agents. What had begun as a routine morning was quietly transforming into an urgent search, and every unanswered call carried one unmistakable message. Danielle Brooks had disappeared from a place where she was expected to be, and people with the authority to find her were beginning to notice. While the unanswered calls continued echoing inside Danielle's briefcase, her thoughts drifted back to the evening before, when she had remained alone in her office long after most of the lights inside the federal building had gone dark. She had carefully reviewed every page that now rested inside the worn leather case, sitting only a few feet away. Each document had been checked twice. Every timeline had been verified. Every witness statement had been organized in precise order. Years of experience had taught her that justice was rarely built upon dramatic moments. It was built upon quiet discipline repeated day after day until the truth became impossible to ignore. The meeting she was supposed to attend that morning was never intended to attract public attention. There would be no television cameras outside the conference room, no reporters waiting in the hallway, and no speeches prepared for the evening news. It was simply another critical step in a long legal process involving allegations of public corruption, financial misconduct, and abuse of public trust. Investigators from multiple agencies had spent more than 18 months assembling evidence. Danielle had coordinated interviews, reviewed legal arguments, and personally prepared the presentation that would guide the next phase of the case. Her role was not to seek headlines. Her responsibility was to protect the integrity of the process. That was why she insisted on carrying the original working files herself instead of placing them in a courier's hands. Back at the bus stop, another secure notification sounded from inside the briefcase. Ryan briefly glanced toward it before returning his attention to Danielle. He still believed he had plenty of time. Danielle understood something he did not. Federal schedules rarely unraveled because of inconvenience. They unraveled because someone essential had suddenly become unavailable. Nearly 3 miles away, the conference room had fallen unusually quiet. The supervising attorney closed the presentation folder in front of him and looked around the table. "Has anyone reached Danielle?" he asked. Several heads slowly shook no. Another assistant tried her direct office line before remembering that Danielle had already left for the morning. A legal secretary checked the vehicle assignment log and noticed something unusual. Danielle had not reserved a government vehicle. Someone suggested that traffic might have delayed the city bus. Another attorney looked at the clock again. Danielle Brooks had built a reputation over 19 years for arriving early, never late. The silence inside the room became noticeably heavier. Within minutes, a federal investigator stepped into the hallway and placed another call. Still no answer. He contacted courthouse security to determine whether Danielle had entered through another entrance. They searched visitor records. Nothing. He checked parking access logs. Nothing. The questions multiplied faster than the answers. At the bus stop, Danielle remained remarkably composed despite knowing exactly what was beginning to happen across the city. She could almost picture her colleagues checking schedules, making calls, and quietly piecing together the timeline. She looked toward Ryan with calm sincerity rather than frustration. "Officer," she said gently, "my coworkers are probably trying to locate me by now. They are thorough people. If they cannot reach me, they will not simply assume I am running late." Ryan answered with quiet confidence. "Then they will eventually hear from you." Danielle offered a small, thoughtful nod. "Yes," she replied, "I believe they will." Her words carried no threat, no warning, and no anger. They reflected simple certainty. Somewhere beyond the morning traffic, people whose careers revolved around finding facts had already begun searching for the one person who never disappeared without explanation. They did not yet know where Danielle Brooks was standing, but with every passing minute, the search was becoming more organized, more urgent, and much closer to reaching the quiet bus stop where one mistaken assumption was about to meet undeniable truth. The first sign that the morning was about to change arrived without flashing lights or raised voices. It came in the form of a dark government sport utility vehicle turning slowly onto Jefferson Avenue, followed by a second vehicle only a few car lengths behind. Danielle noticed them immediately, but showed no visible reaction. Ryan, focused on the conversation in front of him, barely glanced toward the approaching traffic. The vehicles pulled to the curb with deliberate precision, and within seconds, several professionally dressed men and women stepped onto the sidewalk. Their movements were calm, coordinated, and unmistakably purposeful. One of them, a senior investigator wearing a federal identification badge clipped neatly to his jacket, scanned the bus stop before his eyes settled on Danielle. The concern on his face disappeared almost instantly, replaced by visible relief. He walked directly toward her without hesitation. "Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully, "we have been trying to reach you for nearly 40 minutes. Are you all right?" Danielle offered a reassuring smile. "I'm fine," she answered. "There has simply been an unexpected delay." The investigator nodded before noticing Ryan standing only a few feet away. His expression shifted from relief to confusion. "Officer," he asked politely, "has there been some misunderstanding?" Ryan straightened his posture. "I am conducting an investigation," he replied confidently. "The situation is still being evaluated." Before anyone else spoke, another official approached carrying a tablet that displayed a secure government directory. Without raising his voice, he confirmed Danielle's credentials by reading her full name, title, employee identification number, and federal assignment exactly as they appeared in the protected database. Every detail matched the identification Ryan had already examined. A quiet silence settled over the sidewalk. The commuters who had remained nearby exchanged stunned glances as they realized the woman who had been patiently waiting beside them was not simply another passenger heading to work. She was one of the federal attorneys responsible for representing the United States in significant legal proceedings. The young woman who had been observing since the beginning slowly lowered her phone, her expression reflecting disbelief rather than surprise. Danielle remained exactly as she had been throughout the entire encounter, calm, respectful, and composed. She looked toward Ryan with neither satisfaction nor resentment. Instead, she spoke with the same measured professionalism that had defined every word she had said that morning. "Officer Walker, I told you that my identity could be confirmed through the proper channels. Verification has always been available." Ryan looked from Danielle to the federal officials surrounding her. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced confidence. He replayed the conversation in his mind, remembering each opportunity he had been given to make a simple phone call, review the credentials more carefully, or accept the offer to verify her position. Each opportunity had quietly passed without being taken. At that same moment, another government vehicle arrived carrying two senior attorneys from the United States Attorney's Office. One of them walked directly toward Danielle with obvious concern. "The entire conference room has been waiting for you," he said. "The presentation has been delayed because you were carrying the original case materials." Danielle gently placed her hand on the leather briefcase. "Everything is secure," she replied. "Nothing has been disturbed." The attorney smiled with visible relief before thanking the federal investigators for locating her so quickly. Around them, the ordinary sounds of the city slowly returned, but the atmosphere at the bus stop had changed completely. What only minutes earlier had appeared to be an ordinary street corner had quietly become the center of a lesson that no one present would ever forget. Ryan stood silently, surrounded not by accusations, but by undeniable facts. The truth had arrived exactly as Danielle said it would, not through anger or confrontation, but through patient verification, careful professionalism, and the quiet authority of evidence. By early afternoon, the quiet encounter at the bus stop had become the subject of urgent conversations inside city offices, police headquarters, and the United States Attorney's Office. No dramatic announcements were necessary. The facts spoke for themselves. Every minute of the interaction had been preserved through routine documentation, body-worn camera recordings, dispatch communications, and statements from the people who had witnessed the entire exchange. Investigators did not begin with opinions. They began with timelines. They compared radio logs against surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They reviewed the exact moments Danielle Brooks presented her federal credentials, the time she requested verification through official channels, and the repeated opportunities that existed to confirm her identity within only a few minutes. The evidence formed a remarkably consistent picture. Danielle had remained respectful throughout the encounter. She had answered every question directly. She had repeatedly encouraged verification instead of confrontation. The investigation found no indication that she had attempted to conceal her identity or interfere with the officer's responsibilities. At the same time, another review examined the growing chain of unanswered calls that had echoed from her government phone while she remained delayed. Federal attorneys documented the postponed meeting. Court personnel confirmed that the presentation could not proceed without the original legal materials Danielle had been carrying. Investigators recorded how multiple agencies had redirected personnel simply to determine why a veteran assistant United States attorney had unexpectedly disappeared from her scheduled assignment. The delay affected calendars, staffing, and legal proceedings that had required months of careful preparation. News organizations soon obtained confirmation that an internal administrative review had been opened by the police department. Public attention intensified after witnesses described how calmly Danielle had conducted herself despite repeated opportunities to become frustrated. Reporters interviewed commuters who recalled her patient tone and her repeated request for one simple action: verify the identification. Several legal analysts appearing on local television emphasized that professional verification procedures existed precisely to prevent misunderstandings like this one. Community leaders called for transparency rather than speculation, encouraging the city to allow the documented evidence to guide every decision. Danielle herself declined repeated requests for interviews. Instead, she returned to work as soon as the delayed federal meeting concluded. Colleagues later recalled that she spent far more time discussing the legal matters before the grand jury than she did discussing the events at the bus stop. Her focus remained exactly where it had always been, on the responsibilities entrusted to her office rather than on personal recognition. Weeks later, after an extensive review of the documented evidence, the city reached a legal resolution that acknowledged the consequences of the unnecessary delay and the professional harm created by the incident. The settlement totaled $4.7 million, accompanied by policy reviews, additional training requirements, and renewed emphasis on verification procedures before conclusions were reached. For many observers, however, the financial figure was never the most important part of the story. The greater lesson was found inside the quiet sequence of choices that had unfolded on an ordinary sidewalk. Every opportunity to pause, verify, and reconsider had existed from the very beginning. The records simply showed that those opportunities had not been taken until the truth arrived on its own, carried not by emotion or argument, but by evidence that had been available all along. Several months later, the bus stop on Jefferson Avenue looked exactly as it had before that remarkable morning. Commuters still hurried toward work with coffee in their hands. City buses continued following the same routes. People checked their watches, answered phone calls, and disappeared into another ordinary day. Most of them had no idea that a single decision made on that sidewalk had quietly changed professional policies across the city. New training sessions reminded officers that verification was not a sign of weakness. It was one of the strongest tools available to protect both the public and those entrusted to serve it. Supervisors used the incident as an example of how quickly assumptions could outpace facts when patience was replaced by certainty. Danielle Brooks never asked to become the face of that lesson. She continued arriving at the federal courthouse before most of her colleagues, carrying the same worn leather briefcase and greeting courthouse staff by name. Those who worked beside her noticed that nothing about her daily routine had changed. She still listened more than she spoke. She still prepared every case with extraordinary care. She still believed that respect should never depend upon a person's title, appearance, neighborhood, or method of transportation. One afternoon, a young law student completing an internship asked Danielle how she had remained so calm during the entire encounter. Danielle smiled thoughtfully before answering. The law cannot ask people to trust it if the people who serve it stop trusting the truth. Staying calm gave the truth time to arrive. Those words quietly spread throughout the office, repeated by attorneys and investigators who understood exactly what she meant. Ryan Walker's career followed a different path. The administrative findings required him to confront difficult questions about judgment, procedure, and the responsibility that comes with authority. Training, counseling, and accountability became part of his professional future. Friends later recalled that he spoke less about being confident and more about being careful. The experience taught him that experience alone could never replace verification. A badge represented responsibility, not certainty. Looking back, many people remembered the settlement, the headlines, and the public attention. Yet those who truly understood the story remembered something much simpler. They remembered a woman who never raised her voice even when she had every reason to become frustrated. They remembered official credentials that had quietly told the truth from the very beginning. They remembered that a single phone call could have answered every question long before confusion became consequence. Above all, they remembered that dignity is not something another person gives you. It is something you choose to carry, even when others fail to recognize it. Every person waiting at a bus stop, standing in line at a grocery store, walking through an airport, or sitting quietly on a park bench has a story that cannot be seen with a quick glance. Some carry ordinary routines. Others carry extraordinary responsibility. None deserve to be measured by appearance alone. Justice reaches its highest purpose when it replaces assumption with understanding, confidence with humility, and suspicion with careful verification. That morning on Jefferson Avenue did not become unforgettable because someone possessed authority. It became unforgettable because the truth remained patient long enough to reveal itself. The strongest voice in the end was never anger. It was evidence. The greatest victory was never the financial settlement. It was a reminder that real justice begins the moment we choose to see people for who they are instead of who we assume they must be. Because a uniform can represent authority, but character reveals integrity, and the truth will always arrive, even if it has to wait for someone willing to finally listen.